He wasn't supposed to survive. The words echoed through Caleb Brooks' mind as he braced himself against the icy wind whipping across the mountain pass. Snow had been falling steadily for hours, thick and heavy, blanketing the pines and the narrow road in a blinding white, turning every familiar contour into a ghostly outline. His boots crunched against the hard-packed snow, each step sending a whisper of frost into the air, mixing with the scent of pine resin and the faint tang of metal from his dog tags clinking softly against his chest. Visibility was almost zero, and the dim glow from his flashlight barely cut through the swirl of flakes, yet something in the distance made him pause. A flash of white, unnaturally bright against the gray haze, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of a chest. Caleb's breath hitched in his throat, visible as a plume of vapor as he crouched closer, scanning the figure through the storm. There, half buried in snowdrifts nearly waist-high, lay a German shepherd with fur as white as freshly fallen snow, ears flattened, eyes barely open, amber flickering in the faint light, and body curled protectively around something small. The dog's ribs were faintly visible beneath the frost-laden fur, and its muzzle twitched with shallow, ragged breaths. Caleb's hands instinctively went to his pack for gloves, but the wind stole warmth faster than he could give it. He knelt slowly, voice low, almost a whisper. "Hey, it's okay, buddy. I've got you." The dog lifted its head slightly, amber eyes locking with his, filled with recognition and something Caleb could only call trust born from survival instinct, a spark that refused to die in the cold. Snowflakes clung to his jacket as he reached out, brushing away ice from the dog's fur with gentle, deliberate movements, careful not to startle, careful not to break the fragile moment. The dog made no sound, no whine, no bark, only the faintest tremor, as if it understood that its fate now rested in the hands of this man. Caleb's pulse quickened with each heartbeat, not from exertion but from the gravity of the scene, the weight of isolation pressed down by wind and snow. A mountain pass rendered silent except for the hiss of snow against rock and the distant cry of a lone raven circling above. His eyes traced the dog's collar, barely hanging from a frosted leather strap, a half-visible dog tag frozen stiff with ice, glinting faintly. Caleb reached out, prying it free carefully, and in the brief contact felt the warmth of life still present beneath the icy coat, a reminder that miracles, however small and fragile, sometimes survived against impossible odds. He murmured again, voice steadier now, "You're not alone anymore." The dog shifted minutely, pressing a paw against his hand as if to confirm the bond, as if to say, "I've been waiting, and now you're here." Around them, snow continued to fall, relentless, and Caleb knew the trek back down the pass would be treacherous, but nothing else mattered except this creature whose loyalty had kept it alive through the storm. Every careful movement, every whispered reassurance, was a thread weaving them together against the silence of the mountain, and in that fragile, frozen moment, Caleb understood that saving this dog was not just an act of duty, but the start of a bond that neither time nor storm could sever. The mountain wind had intensified, whipping snow across the narrow pass in thick sheets that stung Caleb Brooks' cheeks as he carefully guided the German shepherd, Ghost, back toward his vehicle. Every step was measured, boots sinking into the fresh powder, the white landscape stretching endlessly around them like an ocean frozen in time. The dog's paw prints left shallow impressions, a fragile trail that marked its struggle and survival. Caleb kept one hand on the dog's flank, feeling the slight tremor in its muscles, the shallow rise and fall of its chest under the cold coat. The storm made every sound muted except for the crunch of snow beneath their movement, the occasional distant snap of a brittle branch, and the faint, rhythmic hum of the wind through the pine needles. Ghost's amber eyes remained locked on him, alert and intelligent, scanning the surroundings with every cautious movement. Caleb noticed the frost beginning to form along the edges of the dog's fur, glinting like fine crystals in the dim glow of his flashlight, and he adjusted the coat wrapped around Ghost, pressing it closer to shield it from the icy assault. The cold seeped into Caleb's bones as well, and he could feel the bite of the wind through the layers of his jacket, yet his focus never wavered from the dog in front of him. Each step forward was a test of endurance, the air dense with the scent of pine resin mixed with the faint metallic tang of the old dog tag he held carefully in his palm, which he had freed from the frozen leather strap moments ago. The tag was partially obscured by ice, but enough was visible to stir a memory in Caleb, a ghost of the past mission where he and Corporal Isaiah Reed had worked side by side, relying on their K-9 partners to navigate treacherous terrain. The thought of his lost comrade lent a quiet urgency to his movements, as if Ghost were carrying the last thread of that bond across the storm. Every so often, the dog would pause, head tilting, nostrils flaring to catch a scent beyond the veil of snow. Caleb followed the subtle cues, recognizing the instinctive signs he had seen in countless training exercises and field operations. The slight lift of a paw, the small shift in stance, a focused gaze toward a barely discernible path. They moved in careful synchrony, a human and a canine bound by necessity, intuition, and the shared memory of survival. The storm continued to rage, obscuring the surrounding landscape. Yet Caleb could make out the silhouette of the cabin in the distance, its outline softened by layers of snow. The thought of reaching warmth, safety, and the ability to provide proper care for Ghost kept him moving, step after step, despite the fatigue pressing on his limbs. Inside the cabin, the faint smell of wood smoke from a small stove promised a reprieve from the harsh outdoors, a place where blankets and warmth awaited, where the dog's shallow breathing could become steadier. Caleb's mind was a mixture of relief and apprehension, aware that any delay, any misstep, could prove fatal for the fragile K-9. As they neared the door, Ghost leaned slightly against Caleb's leg, a silent request for support and reassurance, and Caleb responded with a firm but gentle pressure of his hand along the dog's side, whispering soft, encouraging words he did not expect to hear aloud. "Almost there, buddy. Just a little further." The dog's ears flicked at every sound, alert yet trusting, as if understanding that this was the moment where survival depended not just on strength, but on the bond they shared. Caleb pushed the door open, feeling a rush of warmer air and the subtle scent of dry wood and fabric inside the cabin, and he eased Ghost across the threshold, careful to maintain the balance between caution and urgency. The dog's paws touched the wooden floor, and for the first time in hours, the tremor in its limbs lessened slightly, a fragile hint of relief. Caleb exhaled, the tension of the storm outside still clinging to his coat and hair, but the immediate danger behind them. Ghost raised his head, amber eyes surveying the interior with measured curiosity, sniffing the warmth and the faint aroma of blankets. Caleb moved to the stove, pulling over a folded blanket and laying it gently on the floor, guiding Ghost onto it, ensuring that the dog was as insulated from the cold as possible. Every careful movement, every subtle adjustment, was a reaffirmation of the connection between them, a dialogue of trust without words, a negotiation of hope between a human and a creature who had endured the unforgiving storm. Caleb crouched beside the dog, pressing a gloved hand against its back, feeling the slow, steady return of warmth and the subtle strength that lingered beneath the frailty. Outside, the wind continued to howl through the surrounding pines, but inside the cabin, for the first time since the storm had begun, there was the quiet pulse of life and the shared understanding that they had both made it to a place of temporary safety, a fragile reprieve that allowed them to prepare for the long recovery that lay ahead. Caleb Brooks stayed crouched beside Ghost, the warmth from the small cabin stove brushing against their faces, contrasting sharply with the biting cold still clinging to their clothes and fur. Ghost's chest rose and fell slowly now, each exhale forming tiny clouds that mingled with the faint smell of pine smoke and aged wood. Caleb's gloved hands carefully traced along the dog's shoulders, feeling the tension ease from muscles that had held constant vigilance against the unforgiving mountain storm. Outside, snow continued to pile against the cabin walls, creating soft mounds that muted every distant sound, leaving only the subtle creak of the roof and the occasional groan of frost-laden branches in the wind. The dog lifted its head slightly, amber eyes following Caleb as he rose to fetch a basin of warm water from the corner, the small metal clinking against the wooden floor echoing in the otherwise hushed space. Caleb poured the water carefully into a shallow dish and guided Ghost's nose toward it, watching intently as the dog lapped gently, each tongue flick a measure of progress, a sign that life had not been extinguished. He kept his voice low, rhythmic, almost a chant. That is it. You are safe now. You are okay. Ghost's ears twitched at the sound, alert and responsive, and for the first time in hours, the dog allowed a subtle wag of the tail, a small motion that conveyed acknowledgement, trust, and a flicker of relief. Caleb moved toward the small cot he had prepared with blankets, spreading them carefully so that Ghost could lie comfortably, cushioning every movement as though handling something fragile and precious. He knelt beside the dog, adjusting the layers, brushing away snowflakes and tiny icicles clinging to the white fur, and paused, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of the dog's heartbeat beneath his hand, a cadence that seemed to synchronize with his own. Every detail, the sound of the wind, the warmth of the blankets, the faint scent of pine resin, was a reminder of the stark contrast between the mountain's harsh indifference and the fragile sanctuary within the cabin. Caleb spoke softly, recounting small, mundane things from the day before the storm, stories about his journey back from the memorial, memories of Corporal Isaiah Reed, the long hours of patrol, and the quiet companionship that had defined the K-9 units they had worked with. Ghost's gaze followed him, alert yet calm, the amber eyes reflecting the flickering light and an intelligence that understood more than words could convey. Caleb felt a subtle connection building, a silent communication that transcended language, where each gesture, each touch, and each sound carried meaning. He watched as the dog shifted slightly to nestling more comfortably into the blankets, breathing easier now, nostrils flaring gently to catch the warmth around them. The quiet moments stretched, a slow, deliberate unfolding of recovery, where tension was replaced by attentiveness, where the storm outside seemed to respect the sanctuary of the space they now shared. Caleb moved to a small counter, fetching a damp cloth to wipe away traces of frost from Ghost's paws, careful to avoid abrupt movements, speaking in soft tones to reassure the dog. "Almost there, buddy. Just rest now." Ghost responded with subtle nudges, leaning against Caleb, the weight of trust pressing lightly, as if affirming that survival was a shared effort, a mutual reliance that had begun in the cold and now extended into warmth and safety. Each sound, the creak of the wood, the sigh of the stove, the occasional tap of a snow-laden branch against the window, served to mark the passage of time and the gradual reclaiming of vitality. Caleb continued to observe every flicker of motion, every rise and fall of the dog's chest, every tentative stretch of muscles that had remained rigid through the storm. Outside, the snow continued to drift, shaping soft contours against the cabin, yet inside, the air was imbued with a fragile sense of hope, a quiet celebration of endurance. Ghost finally closed his eyes briefly, a surrender to comfort and warmth that marked the first clear sign that life had returned beyond the margins of survival. Caleb remained by his side, glancing around the cabin for supplies, blankets, and anything that could further ease the recovery, every action measured and deliberate, ensuring that the fragile equilibrium was maintained. The stillness, punctuated only by the dog's measured breaths and the faint sound of a small fire crackling, created a space where healing could begin, where the bond of human and canine, tested by the mountain storm and the cold, could solidify into a partnership that would endure well beyond the immediate crisis. Every gesture, every careful adjustment, every word spoken in hushed, deliberate tones, wove together the foundation of trust and mutual reliance, a quiet prelude to the journey that awaited them once the storm subsided and the mountain pass yielded again to the clarity of day. The first clear sound that reached Caleb after hours of wind was not the stove, not the snow sliding softly from the roof, but the faint scrape of Ghost's paw against the wooden floor. It came once, then again, slow and deliberate, like a message being written by someone too weak to speak. Caleb lifted his head from where he had been sitting beside the blanket, his back stiff from the cold and the long watch, and saw the white German shepherd staring toward the cabin door. The dog was not trying to stand, not yet, but every line of his body had changed. His ears had risen. His nose moved carefully through the air. His amber eyes, dull with exhaustion only an hour before, now held a sharpness Caleb recognized from years around working dogs. This was not panic. This was purpose. Caleb followed the dog's gaze to the frosted window, where the world beyond the glass was nothing but darkness, snow, and the thin gold reflection of the fire behind him. "What is it?" he asked softly, though he already knew a trained dog did not fix on emptiness without reason. Ghost answered with a low breath, almost a whine, then pushed his muzzle toward the old collar Caleb had set on the table to thaw. The broken leather strap lay beside Caleb's gloves, dripping onto the wood in tiny beads. The metal tag, freed from its casing of ice, had dried enough for the engraving to show under the lamplight. Caleb picked it up slowly. The tag was bent at one edge, worn smooth in places, but 3 letters remained clear. R.E.D. His thumb passed over them once. Then again, the room seemed to narrow around him. Reed. The name did not arrive as a thought. It arrived as a weight. Corporal Isaiah Reed had been the kind of man who made hard places feel less hard, a Marine with a quiet laugh, a steady hand, and a habit of feeding half his dinner to any stray dog that wandered near the fence line. Caleb could still see him standing under a pale morning sky years earlier, one hand resting on the head of a white K9 in training, saying that some souls were sent to guard us before we knew we needed guarding. Caleb had not allowed himself to remember that voice for a long time. Memories were dangerous when a man lived alone. They came in softly, then stayed too long. Ghost shifted on the blanket and made the sound again, this time weaker, but pointed toward the door. Caleb looked from the tag to the dog, and something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the storm. "You knew him," he whispered. Ghost held his gaze, not like a pet waiting for praise, like a witness. Caleb reached for his phone on the counter, but there was no signal, only the blank, useless symbol at the top of the screen. The landline had gone dead before midnight. The nearest veterinary clinic was more than 12 miles down the mountain road, and the county plows would not reach this pass until morning, maybe later if the wind kept rising. He thought of Dr. Emily Harper in town, with her calm voice and no-nonsense kindness, the woman who had once treated a ranch dog through a winter seizure while half the valley watched from the parking lot. He needed her. Ghost needed her more. Caleb moved to the small radio set near the shelf, an old emergency unit he kept charged out of habit because Marines trusted preparation more than hope, even when hope was all they had left. Static filled the cabin when he turned the dial, a harsh white noise that blended with the storm outside. "This is Staff Sergeant Caleb Brooks on North Ridge Road," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I have an injured military working dog in my cabin. Possible hypothermia. Possible identification connected to United States Marine Corps personnel. Requesting veterinary assistance if anyone can hear me." Only Static answered. Ghost lowered his head but did not look away from the door. Caleb tried again, changing channels, turning the antenna toward the window, speaking into the little black radio as snow rattled against the glass like dry rice. On the 4th attempt, a voice broke through in pieces. "Brooks, this is Deputy Ryan Miller. Signal is weak. Say again." Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, not in relief, but in gratitude too heavy to name. "Ryan, I found a K9 in the pass. White German Shepherd. He is alive, but barely. I need Dr. Harper." The static cracked. "Road is nearly closed. You sure he is safe to approach?" Caleb looked at Ghost, at the dog's trembling body, at the paw still stretched toward the door as though the mountain itself had called his name. His voice dropped, quiet and firm. "He is not dangerous. He is scared, and he is trying to tell me something." For a moment, there was nothing but the wind. Then Ryan answered, softer now. "I will get Harper. Keep him warm. Do not let him sleep too deep." Caleb set the radio down and returned to Ghost's side. He warmed a towel near the stove, folded it around the dog's paws, and placed the old tag beside his own on the floor between them. 2 small pieces of metal. 2 lives separated by years, now meeting in a cabin while the storm covered every road out. Ghost sniffed the tag, then Caleb's hand, then the direction of the door again. His eyes were fading with fatigue, but the message remained. Caleb understood enough to be afraid of what he did not yet know. He laid one hand gently on the dog's shoulder and leaned close, his voice barely more than breath. "You kept your post, did you not?" Ghost blinked slowly. Outside, somewhere beyond the curtain of snow, the mountain held its secret. The radio went silent again, leaving Caleb with the weight of its last instruction and the soft, uneven breathing of the dog at his feet. He fed the stove another split log and watched orange light climb through the cracks, warming the cabin in slow waves that could not quite reach the storm outside. Ghost lay still on the folded blankets, his white fur no longer crusted with ice, but his body remained too quiet for comfort. Every few minutes, Caleb pressed 2 fingers gently against the inside of the dog's front leg, feeling for the pulse Dr. Emily Harper had taught him to check years ago when a neighbor's old hound had collapsed during a summer heat wave. It was there, faint but stubborn. Stubborn counted. In the Marines, stubborn had carried men through long roads, bad weather, empty stomachs, and grief that did not announce itself until the room got quiet. Caleb understood stubborn. He had lived on it for years. Still, the broken tag on the floor unsettled him more than the storm. R.E.D. 3 letters. Not enough for certainty, yet enough to open a door inside him that he had nailed shut. Isaiah Reed had worn his name like a promise, not loud, not proud, just steady. The kind of Marine who remembered birthdays, wrote letters home for men who struggled with words, and once spent an entire night sitting beside a nervous young working dog because he said fear should never have to sleep alone. Caleb looked at Ghost's face in the firelight. The dog's eyelids fluttered, and for one brief second, his palm moved toward the door again. Caleb leaned close. "I hear you," he whispered. "I just do not know what you are asking yet." Nearly 40 minutes later, headlights flickered through the frosted window, pale and trembling as they climbed the buried drive. Ghost opened his eyes before Caleb heard the engine. The dog lifted his head an inch, ears rising, not with alarm but recognition of movement, of people approaching, of the world changing again. Caleb stood and opened the door before they knocked. Wind rushed in first, carrying snow across the floor in a bright scatter, followed by Deputy Ryan Miller in a heavy county jacket and Dr. Emily Harper with a medical bag held tight against her side. Ryan was red-faced from the cold, his hat dusted white, his boots packed with snow. Emily stepped past him without ceremony, her gray scarf tucked under her coat, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes already fixed on Ghost. "Close the door," she said, calm as a church bell. Caleb obeyed. Emily knelt beside the dog, her movements gentle but efficient, the way some people prayed with their hands instead of their mouths. She checked Ghost's gums, listened to his chest, ran careful fingers along his legs and ribs, and tucked a thermometer beneath the blanket. Ghost watched her but did not resist. Once, when her hand passed near the old collar, he turned his head toward Caleb, as if to make sure the Marine was still there. Caleb stayed where Ghost could see him. "He has been out in this longer than a few hours," Emily said quietly. "Maybe a day, maybe more. His temperature is low, and he is exhausted. I do not like how shallow his breathing is." Ryan shifted near the door. "Should we try to move him down to the clinic?" Emily looked toward the window, where snow streaked sideways through the porch light. "Not in this. The road could vanish under us before we made the first mile." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Tell me what he needs." Emily opened her bag and laid out supplies on the cabin floor with steady hands. "Warmth. Fluids if he can tolerate them. Quiet. And he needs to stay awake enough that we know he is still fighting." Ghost released a low breath, then pushed his muzzle weakly toward the north-facing wall. Emily paused. Ryan noticed it too. "He has been doing that," Caleb said, looking toward the ridge. Ryan glanced at him, then at the dog. "There is nothing up there but timber, old service roads, and that abandoned maintenance spur." Caleb picked up the broken tag and handed it to Emily. Her face changed only slightly, but Caleb saw it. Recognition, then caution. "Reed," she said under her breath. Ryan looked between them. "As in Corporal Reed?" Caleb nodded once. The cabin fell quiet except for the stove and the wind. Emily set the tag down with care, like it was not metal but memory. Ghost gathered himself, struggling to rise. His front legs trembled, and Emily moved to stop him, but Caleb raised a hand gently. "Wait." The dog did not stand fully. He only dragged one paw forward and placed it on Caleb's boot. Then he turned his head toward the ridge again, not begging for comfort, not asking for food, pointing. Caleb felt the old field sense settle over him, the part of him that knew when a silence had shape. Emily saw it too. Her voice softened. "Caleb, he may not survive another trip into that weather." Caleb crouched until his eyes were level with Ghost's. The dog was fading, but the message in him was still alive, bright beneath the weakness. Caleb touched the white fur between his ears, and the words came out before he could weigh them. He stood his post. Now I will stand mine. Ryan exhaled slowly, not arguing yet, not agreeing either. Emily wrapped another warm towel around Ghost's body and looked toward the dark window. Beyond it, the mountain waited with its secret buried under snow, and inside the cabin, a tired Marine began to understand that this rescue had never been only about saving one dog. The decision did not come with a shout. It came quietly, in the way Caleb Brooks reached for his winter-field coat, checked the flashlight batteries, and slid Isaiah Reed's broken tag into the pocket closest to his heart. Dr. Emily Harper watched him from beside the blanket where Ghost lay wrapped in warmth, her hand resting lightly against the dog's shoulder, counting each breath with the patience of someone who had seen fragile life turn in both directions. Deputy Ryan Miller stood near the door, one hand on his radio, looking through the frosted glass at the mountain beyond the porch light. The storm had not weakened. It had deepened. Snow moved sideways now, driven by a wind that bent the pines and erased tracks almost as soon as they were made. "Caleb," Emily said softly, "listen to me. He is not strong enough to walk far." Caleb tightened the straps on his boots and looked down at Ghost. The dog's amber eyes were open, fixed on him, tired but burning with that same clear purpose. "Then I will carry him." Ryan turned from the window. North Ridge after midnight in this weather is no place to prove a point. Caleb did not answer right away. He lifted the old collar from the table, held it under the lamp, and studied the worn leather, the frozen cracks, the faint scent of wet fur and pine still clinging to it. "This is not a point," he said at last. "This is a message." Ghost gave a small sound, not quite a whine, not quite a breath, and pushed his muzzle toward the door. Emily closed her medical bag with a slow click. "If you are going, I am going." Ryan sighed. The kind of sigh a man gives when he knows the right thing has already outrun the safe thing. "I will take the lead. My truck has chains. We get as far as the maintenance spur, no farther unless the road holds." Caleb crossed the room and crouched beside Ghost. "You hear that, buddy?" he whispered. "We are going back." Ghost tried to rise, but his legs trembled beneath him. Caleb slid one arm under the dog's chest and the other beneath his hindquarters, lifting with careful strength. Ghost was lighter than he should have been, all wet warmth, bones, and trust. His head came to rest against Caleb's shoulder, and for a second, the Marine stood completely still. He remembered another night, years ago, when Isaiah Reed had carried a tired K9 through a training field after the dog refused to quit. Reed had laughed then, breathless and young, saying, "Some partners do not stop when their legs do. That is why we carry them." Caleb swallowed the memory and stepped toward the door. The cold hit them like a wall. Snow rushed across the porch, bright in the beam of Ryan's flashlight, each flake spinning like ash from a silent fire. Emily pulled her hood tight and followed close, one hand gripping the strap of her bag. Ryan moved ahead to the truck, clearing a path with his boots, shoulders hunched against the wind. Caleb held Ghost under his coat as much as he could, shielding the dog's head from the worst of it. The truck engine groaned awake, headlights cutting 2 tunnels into the storm. They drove slowly, tires gripping and slipping over the buried road, the cabin fading behind them until it was only a faint yellow memory through the glass. Inside the truck, no one spoke for the first mile. The heater rattled. The radio crackled with broken county chatter. Ghost lay across Caleb's lap, eyes half open, nose pointed toward the windshield as if tracking a scent the humans could not understand. Every time Ryan eased toward a safer bend, Ghost stirred and gave a faint sound. Every time the truck corrected north, he settled again. Emily noticed first. "He is guiding us." Ryan glanced in the mirror. Through a snowstorm? Caleb kept his hand on Ghost's side, feeling the shallow rhythm of life beneath his palm. Through whatever he came from. 2 miles up, the county road disappeared beneath a drift nearly 4 feet high. Ryan stopped the truck, headlights shining against a wall of snow. Beyond it, the old maintenance spur climbed into timber, narrow, unplowed, and almost invisible. The wind moved through the trees with a low, hollow voice. Ryan killed the engine, and the sudden quiet felt larger than the storm. "This is where the truck stops," he said. Emily looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Ghost. The dog had raised his head. His ears were forward. His eyes were locked on the dark line of the spur. Caleb opened the door, and the world became cold in motion. He carried Ghost against his chest while Ryan walked ahead with the flashlight, and Emily followed behind, her boots sinking deep with every step. The snow swallowed their legs to the shin, then to the knee in places, making each yard feel like a mile. Branches bowed under white weight. The air smelled of frozen cedar, engine oil from the truck behind them, and something older beneath the snow, something buried and waiting. After nearly 20 minutes, Ghost suddenly lifted his head higher and released one sharp breath. Caleb stopped. Ryan's flashlight swept across the trees, then down a slope beyond the trail. At first, there was only darkness. Then the beam caught the edge of metal beneath the snow, dull green, half hidden under drift and pine needles. Emily drew in a quiet breath. Ryan took 2 steps closer. That is not a rock. Caleb's arms tightened around Ghost. The dog's body trembled, but his eyes did not leave the shape below. Beneath the storm's white silence, at the bottom of the shallow ravine, an old military utility vehicle lay tilted against the trees, nearly buried, as though the mountain had been keeping its secret for years. Caleb stood at the edge of the ravine with Ghost held against his chest, the storm moving around them in long white waves, and for a moment no one spoke. The old utility vehicle rested below at a slant, its faded green body pressed between 2 pines, half swallowed by snow and shadow. It did not look abandoned in the ordinary way. It looked hidden, protected, as if the mountain had folded itself over the secret and waited for the right witness to return. Ryan swept his flashlight across the hood, then along the windshield, where frost had drawn pale veins over the glass. "Careful going down," he said. "Snow is deep near the bottom." Caleb nodded, but his eyes stayed on Ghost. The dog had become painfully still. His ears were forward, his nose trembling, his breath shallow against Caleb's coat. Then it came again, so faint Caleb almost thought the wind had made it. A small scratching sound. Not from the trees. Not from the vehicle shifting under snow. From inside. Emily heard it too. Her face changed in the flashlight glow, all her professional calm tightening into focus. There is something in there. Ryan moved first, stepping sideways down the slope, testing each place before putting weight on it. Caleb followed more slowly, holding Ghost close, turning his body to shield the dog from falling snow. Emily came behind them, one hand braced against branches, medical bag thumping softly at her hip. The descent was only 30 yards, but in the storm it felt like crossing into another world. The air was colder below, trapped between the trees, smelling of frozen earth, old metal, and pine sap. When they reached the vehicle, Ryan brushed snow from the side window with his gloved hand. The glass was clouded from within. He tried the door. It resisted at first, sealed by ice and time, then opened with a stiff groan that seemed too loud in the ravine. Caleb lowered Ghost carefully onto a drift-packed firm beside the vehicle, keeping one arm around him. The dog did not try to run. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on the dark interior, and gave a breath that sounded almost like relief. Ryan shined the light inside. There were old blankets, a cracked plastic storage bin, a torn canvas jacket, and beneath it, movement. Tiny, weak, barely more than a ripple. Emily pushed forward, her voice low. "Give me light." Ryan held the beam steady as she reached in and lifted the canvas with both hands. A small white German Shepherd puppy lay curled in the narrow space between the seat and the floorboard, no bigger than a bundle of winter wool, his fur dull with cold, his eyes closed, his body trembling in thin waves. For 1 second, the storm vanished from Caleb's hearing. He saw only the puppy and Ghost's face beside him, the old K9 staring as if counting a soul he had refused to leave behind. Emily gathered the puppy gently into a thermal blanket from her bag and brought him close to her chest. "Alive," she said. The word was quiet, but it moved through Caleb like a bell. Ryan exhaled hard and turned his face away for a moment. Caleb bent beside Ghost. "You brought us to him," he whispered. Ghost blinked once, slow and exhausted. Emily checked the puppy with quick, careful hands. "He is cold, but he has a stronger pulse than I expected. Young, maybe 8 or 9 weeks. He has been protected from the worst of the wind in there." Caleb looked into the vehicle again, drawn by something beneath the puppy's resting place. A folded piece of fabric sat under the old blanket, stiff with frost, military green with a faded name tape stitched along one edge. He reached in and lifted it carefully. Snow melted on his gloves. The name tape was worn, but the letters were still clear enough. Read. Caleb did not breathe for a moment. Emily looked over. Ryan's flashlight trembled slightly. Inside the fold of the fabric was a small waterproof pouch, the kind Marines used for field notes, its seal cracked but still holding. Caleb opened it with hands that no longer felt cold. Inside was a piece of paper, creased, faded, but legible beneath the beam of light. The handwriting was Isaiah's. Caleb knew it before he read a word. Some people had voices in their handwriting. Reed's had always leaned forward, steady, practical, alive. Caleb swallowed and read silently at first, then aloud because the ravine itself seemed to be listening. Brooks, if you find him, take him home. Ghost will know the way. He always does. The wind moved through the pines above them, but no one spoke. Caleb stared at the note until the words blurred. It was not a full explanation. Not yet. It did not tell him how this vehicle had ended here, or why Ghost had been left to finish the last mile alone. But it told him enough. Isaiah Reed had trusted the dog. He had trusted Caleb. And somehow, through snow, years, and silence, that trust had found its way back. Ghost shifted beside him, trying to move closer to the puppy now wrapped in Emily's arms. Caleb helped him, supporting the old K9's weight as Ghost stretched his neck and touched his nose gently to the puppy's blanket. The puppy made the smallest sound, thin as a thread, and Ghost closed his eyes. Not asleep, not surrendering, completing something. Emily looked at Caleb, her expression soft in a way he had never seen. We need to get both of them warm now. Ryan nodded, already clearing the path with his flashlight. Caleb tucked the note into his coat with the broken tag, then lifted Ghost again. The dog's body sagged against him, drained beyond strength, but his head rested near Caleb's heart. Emily carried the puppy. Ryan led them back up through the snow. And as they climbed from the ravine, Caleb understood that the mountain had not given them a mystery to solve. It had given them a promise to keep. By the time Caleb Brooks reached the cabin with Ghost and the small German Shepherd puppy in Emily Harper's careful hold, the storm had begun to ease, leaving the world outside a quiet expanse of white and shadow. Caleb set Ghost gently on the thick blankets he had spread across the floor, adjusting the old K9's weight so that the dog could rest comfortably but remain alert. The puppy, wrapped snugly in the thermal blanket, nestled against Ghost, whose body trembled with exhaustion yet radiated a protective warmth that seemed to soothe the smaller companion. Caleb knelt beside them, hands tracing the edges of the blankets, brushing away remaining snowflakes and icy strands of fur, murmuring in low tones to reassure both animals. The cabin smelled of dry wood, faint pine, and the residual scent of wet coats, a mixture that somehow felt like life itself had settled in the room. Emily checked the puppy again, noting its slow, steady breathing, and then glanced at Caleb. He is stable for now, she said softly. Caleb nodded, eyes returning to Ghost, whose amber gaze followed him attentively, ears flicking at every small noise. The hiss of the stove, the shift of wood settling in the frame, the distant whisper of the wind over the roof. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Caleb took the broken dog tag and the note from Isaiah Reed and laid them carefully beside the blankets, the letters catching the lamplight, a quiet testament of trust across years and miles. Ghost lowered his head slightly, nudging the puppy with his nose as if to remind it that warmth and safety were finally here. Caleb ran a hand along the old dog's back, feeling the tension and fatigue slowly relax into exhaustion, and he allowed himself a slow exhale, tasting relief in the warm, humid air of the cabin. The storm outside still whispered, snow drifting against the window panes in soft waves, but inside, there was a fragile peace, a suspended moment where survival had been honored and the trust between man and canine had been reaffirmed. Caleb rose to fetch a small basin of warm water and a damp cloth, placing it carefully near Ghost and helping him drink in shallow, steady sips, each one a testament to resilience and willpower. Emily knelt beside the puppy afterward, lifting it slightly to check its paws and body for lingering frost or strain, speaking in quiet, calm tones that filled the cabin with reassurance. Ghost watched every movement, nostrils flaring, head lifting with subtle attentiveness. as if understanding that this care was part of the completion of a mission, a silent acknowledgement of a promise kept. Caleb adjusted blankets around both animals, ensuring that the weight and warmth were shared, and he pressed his palm gently against the puppy's tiny chest, feeling its heartbeat quicken and slow in the rhythm of survival. Outside, the wind softened as the first pale light of dawn touched the tips of the pines, scattering silver across the snow and hinting at a day yet to be faced. Caleb allowed himself to glance at the horizon, the mountains fading from opaque white to subtle shades of gray and blue, and he thought of the journey that had brought him, Ghost, and the puppy to this small cabin, where warmth, life, and trust had converged. The dog lifted its head and nudged the puppy gently again, a subtle motion that spoke of protection and understanding, and Caleb realized that for the first time in hours, the urgency of survival had become a shared, quiet relief. Emily looked from the puppy to Ghost to Caleb and offered a small nod, as if the three of them, human, veteran canine, and young pup, had passed a trial that only trust, patience, and the smallest acts of care could complete. Caleb settled onto the edge of the blanket, hands resting lightly on Ghost's shoulders, feeling the subtle pulse beneath fur that spoke of resilience, loyalty, and the quiet miracles that sometimes waited in the snow. And for a long time, no one moved except for the gentle rise and fall of chests and the soft breath of life filling the cabin, a sanctuary created in the wake of storm and trust fulfilled. Morning arrived slowly over the mountain cabin, pale light filtering through frost-lined windows, dusting the wooden floor with soft silver. Caleb Brooks remained seated beside Ghost and the small puppy, the warmth of the stove creating gentle shadows across their forms. Ghost had shifted onto his side, head resting lightly against Caleb's knee, eyes half closed but alert, ears flicking at every sound. A crow in the distance, the slight groan of the cabin settling, the faint scrape of a pine branch against the roof. The puppy, curled against Ghost's chest, stirred occasionally, a small whine of comfort escaping, blending with the quiet rhythm of life returning to both dogs. Caleb traced his fingers along Ghost's thick fur, feeling the subtle tension ease with each measured breath, the muscles finally surrendering to rest after the long ordeal of the storm, the journey down the slope, and the rescue at the vehicle. Outside, the world was bright with fresh snow, trees sparkling with frost, and the air so cold and pure that each inhalation brought a crisp clarity to the mind. Caleb glanced at the broken dog tag and Isaiah Reed's note laid beside the blankets, a silent testament to loyalty, trust, and the invisible threads connecting the living and those remembered. He pressed his palm over the tag, then over Ghost's shoulder, feeling a heartbeat in the metal as if Reed's presence lingered in the room. Emily Harper carefully arranged additional blankets around the dogs, murmuring soft reassurances and checking the puppy's tiny paws for lingering cold, each gesture deliberate, gentle, and precise. Caleb watched, noting the small details, the flicker of the puppy's eyes as it adjusted against Ghost, the subtle shift of Ghost's weight to accommodate, the tiny twitch of a paw that signaled comfort. Time seemed suspended, held by the warmth, the soft breathing, and the knowledge that they had survived the worst the mountain could throw at them. Caleb allowed himself to rise slowly, stretching tight muscles and listening to the silence, the wind now a whisper across the ridge, the snow glinting like crushed glass in the early sun. He moved to the small counter and retrieved a cup of water, offering it first to Ghost, whose tongue flicked gently, then to the puppy, small and tentative, accepting in careful sips. Each action was slow, measured, almost ritualistic, reinforcing the bond and the trust that had carried them through the storm. Caleb glanced out the window, noting the glint of icicles hanging from the eaves, sunlight striking them in delicate patterns, and thought of the journey ahead, how the roads would thaw, the valley would awaken, and how both dogs would need warmth, nourishment, and care to regain full strength. Yet for this moment, they were here, together, safe from the storm, the weight of the past and present held in a quiet equilibrium. Ghost lifted his head slightly, amber eyes catching the light, looking directly at Caleb, not with alarm or need, but acknowledgement, a silent agreement that the bond formed in adversity was unbroken, and that the small white puppy now sharing his warmth was a continuation of trust, of protection, of life preserved against impossible odds. Caleb pressed a hand to the top of Ghost's head, feeling the warmth, the pulse, the life that had defied snow, cold, and time, and whispered softly, "We made it. You kept your promise, and now we keep ours." Outside, the first faint calls of birds echoed across the ridge, a quiet chorus to the return of day, while inside, Caleb, Ghost, and the puppy remained together, a trio bound by trust, survival, and the small, quiet miracles that sometimes wait through the longest nights, a bond deeper than words and more enduring than the winter storm that had brought them together.